Stacy clutched her worn-out duffel bag as she stood before the pristine two-story Victorian house. The fresh paint and manicured lawn screamed perfection, making her stomach churn with familiar unease. After 6 foster homes in 3 years, she learned that perfect facades often hid the darkest secrets. The Winters are one of our most respected foster families, Jim Matthews, her social worker, said with an encouraging smile. His weathered face and kind eyes had been her only constant through years of transitions. Robert and Karen have been looking forward to meeting you. As if on cue, the front door opened. Karen Winter emerged, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her smile warm but practiced. Behind her stood Robert, tall and distinguished in his business casual attire. They looked like they'd stepped out of a family magazine. "Welcome home, Stacy." Karen's voice carried across the front yard. "We've been so excited to meet you." Robert stepped forward, extending his hand to take Stacy's bag. "Let me help you with that." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, something Stacy noted automatically, a survival skill honed through years in the system. They led her through a house that smelled of fresh-baked cookies and lemon furniture polish. Family photos lined the walls, carefully arranged to showcase happy moments. Too perfect, Stacy thought, her internal alarm bells quietly chiming. "And this is your room," Karen announced, opening a door on the second floor. The space was decorated in soft blues and greens, with new bedding and curtains that matched. "We wanted you to have your own space to make yourself comfortable." "Thank you," Stacy managed, her voice small in the large room. She'd learned to be grateful, even when her instincts screamed caution. After Jim left, with promises to check in next week, Stacy began unpacking her meager possessions. The dresser drawers slid smoothly, unlike the sticky ones in her last placement. As she pushed her final drawer shut, she noticed something odd about the ceiling, a slight discoloration in one corner. Standing on the bed, she reached up and discovered a trap door to the attic. Years of foster care had taught her to know every escape route, every hiding place. The door opened silently, and dust motes danced in the beam of her phone's flashlight. The attic was surprisingly clean for a storage space, with neat boxes labeled in Karen's precise handwriting. But behind a stack of Christmas decorations, something caught Stacy's eye, a metal briefcase, partially hidden under an old blanket. Her heart pounding, she pulled it out. The case was heavy, its silver surface unmarked. The locks clicked open easily. They hadn't been secured. Inside, neat stacks of bills filled the space, more money than Stacy had ever seen in her life. Footsteps creaked on the stairs below. Stacy quickly closed the case, shoving it back into place. She had just dropped down from the attic when Karen's voice called up, "Stacy, dinner's ready." The dining room was a study in domestic perfection. China plates, polished silver, and a homemade pot roast that would have impressed any food blogger. Robert sat at the head of the table, Karen to his right, both of them painting a picture of suburban bliss. Throughout dinner, Stacy watched their interactions. The way Karen's hand trembled slightly when passing the salt. How Robert's phone buzzed twice, and each time he checked it with thinly veiled urgency. The strange glances they exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. "I need to take this," Robert announced when his phone rang again, excusing himself to his study. Through the partially closed door, Stacy caught fragments of a hushed conversation. "Yes? No, not tonight. The timing has to be perfect." Later, lying in her new bed, Stacy stared at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the day. The money in the attic, the forced smiles, the secretive phone calls. She'd seen enough in her 16 years to know when something wasn't right. In the stillness of night, she heard the distinct sound of footsteps downstairs, followed by a door quietly opening and closing. Through her window, she watched as Robert's dark figure slipped into his car, the engine starting with a soft purr as he drove away into the darkness. A chill ran through Stacy as the taillights disappeared around the corner. In her previous homes, she'd learned to distinguish between normal nocturnal routines and suspicious behavior. This definitely felt like the latter. Robert's departure had been too careful, too practiced, as if he'd done it countless times before. She crept to her window, noting the time on her phone, 11:42 p.m. From her vantage point, she could see Karen's shadow moving in the kitchen below, pacing back and forth. Not the behavior of a wife whose husband had just left for a normal late-night errand. The briefcase in the attic weighed heavily on her mind. Stacy had seen enough crime shows to know that normal people didn't keep that kind of cash hidden away. Coupled with Robert's furtive phone calls and this midnight excursion, a disturbing pattern was beginning to emerge. She thought about Jim, wondering if she should call him. But what would she say? That her new foster father had suspicious cash and made mysterious phone calls? After less than a day in their home? She'd been labeled as difficult before for raising concerns too quickly. No! She needed more information first. Moving silently, another skill perfected through years in the system. Stacy crossed her room to the door. She opened it just enough to hear Karen's footsteps below, now moving from the kitchen to what sounded like Robert's study. The subtle sound of drawers opening and closing drifted up the stairs. Stacy retreated to her bed, mind racing. The Winters might look perfect on paper. The immaculate house, the welcoming smiles, the carefully prepared dinner. But something dark lurked beneath the surface. She'd seen it before. The prettier the package, the uglier the contents could be. Pulling her blanket tight around her shoulders, Stacy made a mental inventory of her new home's layout, exits, and potential hiding spots, a habit that had saved her more than once in the past. Whatever was going on in this house, she needed to be prepared. The night stretched on, and Karen's footsteps finally retreated to the master bedroom. But sleep eluded Stacy as she lay awake, listening intently for Robert's return. Hours passed, marked only by the soft ticking of her bedside clock and the occasional passing car. At 3:17 a.m., the distinct sound of tires on gravel announced Robert's return. Stacy held her breath, listening as he entered through the back door rather than the front. His footsteps were different now, heavier, more hurried. She heard muffled movements in his study again, the sound of something heavy being moved, then silence. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin her own investigation. 6 foster homes had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that the Winters were hiding something dangerous. The perfect family facade was just that, a facade, and Stacy was determined to uncover what lay behind it, no matter the cost. As she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the briefcase of money, Robert's secret phone calls, and his mysterious midnight departure swirled in her mind, pieces of a puzzle she knew she had to solve, if only to survive. Stacy forced a smile during breakfast the next morning, carefully spreading jam on her toast, while observing Robert's exhausted demeanor. He had returned just before dawn, the sound of his car in the driveway alerting her sensitive ears. Now he sat at the table, dark circles under his eyes, mechanically sipping his coffee while pretending everything was normal. Karen busied herself at the stove, her movements slightly more jerky than usual. The morning news played on the small kitchen TV, providing background noise until a breaking report caught everyone's attention. Breaking news! Local authorities are investigating an overnight robbery at First National Bank. The sophisticated heist occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. with an estimated. Karen's hand shot out, changing the channel so quickly that the remote clattered against the counter. "Oh, I hate those depressing news stories," she said, her voice an octave higher than usual. "Who wants to hear about crime during breakfast?" Stacy noticed Robert's knuckles whitening around his coffee mug, his jaw clenching momentarily before he excused himself. Through the kitchen doorway, she watched him disappear into his home office, carrying something under his jacket. Later that morning, while Karen was occupied in the garden, Stacy crept toward the office. The door was locked, but she pressed her ear against the wood, catching fragments of a hushed phone conversation. "Exactly as planned. No witnesses. The timing was perfect. Next location needs more preparation." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she quickly stepped away, hearing Robert's footsteps approaching the door. She pretended to be heading to the bathroom when he emerged, his suspicious gaze following her movements. The doorbell's chime made them both jump. Jim, her social worker, stood on the porch for his routine follow-up visit. His kind face and familiar presence almost made Stacy spill everything right there. "How's the adjustment going, Stacy?" Jim asked as they sat in the living room. "Any concerns?" The words danced on her tongue, but Robert appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with calculated casualness. "She's fitting in wonderfully," he answered before she could speak. "Aren't you, sweetheart?" Karen materialized beside her husband, all nervous energy wrapped in a homemaker's smile. "We're just one big happy family now," she added, her hand clutching Robert's arm a bit too tightly. After Jim left, Stacy retreated to her room, pulling out her phone to document her observations. She created a note titled Homework, but filled it with times, dates, and patterns of Robert's mysterious behavior. That evening, while retrieving a book from the study, she discovered newspaper clippings partially hidden beneath some papers. Headlines about various bank robberies over the past year caught her eye. She quickly photographed them with her phone before returning everything to its place. As night fell, she heard the now familiar sound of Robert's careful movements downstairs. From her window, she watched his dark figure slip into his car. Karen stood in the kitchen doorway, wringing her hands. "Where does Robert go so late?" Stacy had asked her earlier. Karen's reaction was telling. A flinch, followed by a too bright smile. "Oh, he works security. Night shifts, you know. Very important work." Sitting at her computer that night, Stacy's fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for any information about the Winters family. Her blood ran cold when she stumbled upon an archived article. 3 previous teenage girls had been adopted by the Winters over the past 5 years. All 3 had reportedly run away within months, never to be seen again. The article dated back 3 years, featuring a much younger Karen and Robert standing in front of the same house. "Local couple devastated as third adopted teen runs away," the headline read. Their expressions in the photo seemed performative, rehearsed, nothing like genuine grief. Stacy clicked through related articles, each featuring similar stories. Sarah Johnson, age 15, disappeared after 4 months. Emily Chun, 16, vanished during a school night, leaving all her belongings. Maria Rodriguez, 14, reportedly ran away during a family vacation, though no security cameras ever caught her departure from the hotel. A pattern emerged in the timestamps of their disappearances. Each girl vanished shortly after major bank robberies in different cities. The same cities where the Winters had conveniently taken family trips or attended adoption support conferences. Her hands trembling, Stacy opened a private browser window and searched for recent bank robberies in neighboring states. The method was always the same. Sophisticated after-hours entry, disabled security systems, no witnesses, precise timing. Just like tonight's heist, she created a timeline, cross-referencing the dates of the girls' disappearances with reported robberies. The correlation was undeniable. But what had happened to those girls? Had they discovered too much, just as she was doing now? The sound of a car engine made her quickly close her laptop. Robert was returning earlier than usual. Through her cracked door, she heard him and Karen speaking in urgent whispers downstairs. "We need to be more careful." Karen's voice drifted up. "She's not like the others. She watches everything." "Then we'll have to watch her more closely," Robert replied, his tone carrying a threat that made Stacy's skin crawl. While searching her computer late into the night, digging deeper into the Winters' past, a sudden notification appeared on her screen. Someone was attempting to access her device remotely. Her heart stopped as she noticed the connection was coming from within the house. Her fingers froze over the keyboard as she read the old article's final lines about the missing girls. Authorities have found no trace of the teenagers, who are presumed to have joined the alarming statistics of runaways from the foster care system. Stacy's hands trembled as she stared at her computer screen, the old news articles casting an eerie blue glow across her face. The headlines about other teenage girls who had lived with the Winters and mysteriously vanished made her stomach churn. 3 girls in the past 5 years, all reported as runaways. The pattern was unmistakable. She minimized the browser window when she heard footsteps approaching, quickly switching to her homework assignment. Karen appeared in the doorway, her usual perfect smile in place. "Everything all right, sweetheart? You've been quiet today." "Just catching up on schoolwork," Stacy replied, forcing a smile of her own. Once Karen left, Stacy waited 15 minutes before sneaking down to the garage. Her heart pounded as she carefully maneuvered between Robert's meticulously organized tools. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows, creating long shadows that made every corner seem suspicious. Behind a stack of old paint cans, she noticed a loose panel in the wall. Her fingers traced the edges until she found the catch. Inside the hidden compartment, her breath caught. A black ski mask and leather gloves lay wrapped in an oily cloth. The sudden sound of a car engine made her freeze. Robert's silver sedan was pulling into the driveway. Stacy quickly replaced everything, her hands shaking as she pushed the panel back into place. She managed to grab a basketball from nearby just as the garage door began to open. "Stacy, what are you doing in here?" Robert's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "I was looking for something to do." She held up the basketball. "Thought I might shoot some hoops." His eyes narrowed slightly before his face relaxed into that practiced smile. "Dinner's in an hour. Don't stay out too long." That evening, Stacy tried sending a coded message to Jim during dinner. History project research going well. Found some interesting patterns to discuss. But before she could hit send, Karen asked to see her phone, claiming they needed to review their family technology rules. The dinner conversation turned to trust and family loyalty. Robert's voice remained calm, but his words carried clear warnings. "You understand, Stacy, that family means protecting each other. Some families, well, they just don't work out. And when that happens, the system isn't always kind to teenagers." Stacy nodded, pushing her peas around the plate while her mind raced. After dinner, she carefully photographed the mask and gloves using her old digital camera, the one they didn't know about. She tucked the memory card into a hidden pocket in her school notebook. Late that night, she overheard fragments of conversation from Robert's study. Everything set. Thursday security patterns mapped, clean entry and exit. The next morning, her phone refused to connect to any network. When she tried using Karen's laptop, she found new parental controls installed. Robert's rules grew stricter. No unsupervised outings, no phone calls without Karen present, no closed doors. Stacy carefully documented everything in code, using her remaining school supplies. She knew she needed to get the evidence to Jim somehow. The weight of her discoveries pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The other girls who had lived here, what had really happened to them? She waited until both Karen and Robert were occupied with dinner preparations before attempting to send her documented evidence to Jim through her emergency email account. As she pressed the send button, her blood ran cold at the sight of Robert's reflection in her computer screen, standing in her doorway with an unnervingly calm smile. His presence seemed to fill the entire doorway as Stacy's cursor hovered over the send button. She hadn't heard him come up the stairs. How long had he been watching? "Computer troubles?" Robert asked, his voice carrying a dangerous undertone she'd never heard before. Stacy's finger trembled over the mouse. The evidence folder was still open on her screen, the incriminating photos clearly visible. She quickly tried to minimize the window, but Robert was faster. In 3 long strides, he crossed the room and grabbed her wrist. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about privacy and trust, Stacy." His grip tightened slightly. "Karen, could you join us up here?" Footsteps echoed up the stairs as Karen appeared, her usual warm demeanor replaced by something colder, more calculated. She closed the door behind her, and Stacy felt her last escape route vanish. I see our little detective has been busy, Karen said, glancing at the computer screen. Robert, she has photos of the garage. I noticed. Robert released Stacy's wrist, but remained uncomfortably close. You know, Stacy, we've dealt with curious teenagers before. It never ends well for them. Stacy's mind raced to the articles about the missing girls. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. What did you do to them? Do? Karen laughed, but it wasn't her usual musical laugh. They chose to leave, just like you'll choose to leave if you can't learn to be part of this family. Robert reached over and closed the laptop with a decisive click. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, we're moving. A fresh start. And you're going to play your part. The grateful adopted daughter, happy with her new family. One wrong word, one suspicious glance, and he left the thread hanging. As they stood there, watching her with cold, calculating eyes, Stacy tried to send her final email to Jim. Her fingers jabbed desperately at the keyboard, but the screen remained black. Looking for this? Robert held up the power cable. No more messages, no more investigations. Pack your essentials. We leave at dawn. When she tried to reach for her phone, Karen shook her head. Already taken care of, dear. Consider it your first lesson in family loyalty. As they left her room, Robert turned back with a sinister smile. Welcome to the real family business, Stacy. Standing at her window, watching Robert load boxes into his car in the gathering dusk, Stacy caught a glimpse of her laptop screen's reflection. Her heart skipped a beat when she noticed her computer was still connected to the home network, offering one last chance for help. Stacy's heart stopped when she saw Robert's reflection in her phone screen. He stood in the doorway, his usually friendly smile transformed into something sinister. She quickly tried to lock her phone, but his voice cut through the silence like ice. Looking for a better signal to send those photos, Robert stepped into the room, his footsteps heavy against the wooden floor. Karen appeared behind him, her face a mask of cold determination, so different from the caring mother figure she pretended to be. I don't know what you're talking about, Stacy said, reaching for her phone, but Robert was faster. His hand shot out, snatching the device before she could grab it. Oh, I think you do. He scrolled through her photo gallery, his jaw tightening. The garage, the mask, the money in the attic. You've been quite the little detective, haven't you? Karen closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing like a gunshot in Stacy's ears. We've been watching you, Stacy. Every move, every suspicious glance. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? Stacy's eyes darted between them, her mind racing through escape scenarios. The window was too high, and the door was blocked. She was trapped. The others, Stacy managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. The other girls who ran away. What did you do to them? Robert's laugh was hollow. Smart girl. Always the smart ones who figure it out. But they all learn to keep quiet, just like you will. We're moving, Karen announced, pulling out a suitcase from under Stacy's bed. Tonight, start packing. You can't just dash. We can and we will, Robert cut her off. You see, Stacy, you're our perfect cover. The troubled teen we're trying to help. The family working so hard to create a stable environment. Who would suspect us? As Karen began emptying drawers into the suitcase, Robert revealed their operation. They'd been using adopted teenagers as cover for years, moving from city to city, completing their heist before disappearing. The perfect family facade kept suspicions at bay. What happens if I refuse? Stacy challenged, though she already knew the answer. Back to the system, Karen said coldly. With a troubling record of theft, violence, and false accusations against your poor foster parents. Who would believe you then? Robert methodically destroyed the evidence Stacy had gathered, burning papers in a small trash can. You're smart enough to understand your situation, Stacy. Play along and everyone stays safe. Make trouble. His threat hung in the air. During dinner, they maintained a grotesque parody of normal family life. Robert discussed their fresh start in another state, while Karen nodded enthusiastically. Stacy pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. In the garage, she could hear Robert making arrangements, his voice low and urgent on the phone. Karen supervised Stacy's every move as she packed, checking for hidden phones or notes. They all tried to run, Karen whispered when Robert was out of earshot. The others. None of them made it far. There was something in her voice, regret perhaps, or warning. Stacy folded her clothes mechanically, her mind working overtime. There had to be a way out. Robert's network of criminals, the careful planning, the years of successful heists, it all pointed to a sophisticated operation that had evaded detection for years. The truck will be here in an hour, Robert announced, returning to check their progress. Everything needs to be ready. No traces left behind. As Stacy watched them preparing for their escape, she noticed her laptop still sitting on the desk, its power light blinking. While Karen and Robert focused on packing, she realized it was still connected to the Wi-Fi, offering one last chance for salvation. While being watched as she packed her belongings, Stacy noticed her laptop was still connected to the network, offering a final opportunity to call for help. The realization sent a surge of hope through Stacy's body, but she kept her face carefully neutral. Years in foster care had taught her how to mask her emotions. She deliberately fumbled with a stack of books near the laptop, buying precious seconds as her mind raced through possibilities. "Don't forget your school things," Karen said, sorting through Stacy's closet. "We need to maintain appearances at the new location." Robert paced the room, checking his phone repeatedly. "The team's in position. We have a narrow window here." Stacy's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her laptop. "Should I pack this too?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, but shut it down first," Robert ordered, distracted by another incoming message. She nodded, opening the lid. The screen illuminated, and while pretending to close programs, her fingers flew across the keyboard. Years of coding practice in her previous foster home, the only good thing she'd gained there, came rushing back. A simple script, buried in a background process, began uploading her collected evidence to a secure server. Karen appeared behind her. "Hurry up with that." "Just deleting my browser history," Stacy said, adding a self-deprecating laugh. "Don't want anyone finding my embarrassing searches." The comment achieved its intended effect. Karen rolled her eyes and turned away to continue packing. Robert was in the hallway now, discussing logistics in hushed tones. Stacy's heart pounded as she watched the upload progress hidden behind her desktop wallpaper. 67%, 83%, 91%. "Time's up," Robert announced, striding back into the room. "The truck's almost here. Shut it down now." 98%, 99%. Stacy held her breath, her finger hovering over the power button. The progress bar completed just as Robert reached for the laptop. She quickly pressed a button, watching the screen go dark, praying the transfer had finished. A distant sound made everyone freeze. Robert rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. His face hardened as he exchanged a worried look with Karen, while Stacy fought to suppress a smile at the unmistakable wail of approaching police sirens. Stacy's heart raced as she glanced at her laptop, sitting on the desk, still connected to the network. Robert and Karen were busy in the garage, loading boxes into what seemed to be their getaway vehicle. This might be her last chance to reach out for help. With trembling fingers, she opened her computer, careful to keep one ear tuned to the sounds downstairs. Years of moving between foster homes had taught her to be alert to approaching footsteps. The familiar hum of the laptop starting up felt like an eternity. "Everything okay up there?" Karen's voice called from below. "Yes, just packing my school stuff," Stacy responded, trying to keep her voice steady. She quickly opened a programming interface while pretending to fold clothes. Her previous foster family had included a software engineer who had taught her coding, a skill that might now save her life. She began typing rapidly, embedding a distress message within what appeared to be normal internet traffic. The code would ping Jim's office computer with her location and a predetermined danger signal. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she heard Robert's heavy footsteps on the stairs. "Need any help with the packing?" he asked, appearing at her doorway with an artificial smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Almost done," Stacy replied, casually switching screens to show her school folder. Robert lingered, his eyes scanning the room suspiciously. The program continued running in the background, hidden beneath layers of ordinary files. Outside, curious neighbors had begun to gather, watching the sudden moving preparations with interest. Robert stepped out to maintain appearances, engaging in casual conversation about a supposed job transfer. His ability to lie smoothly sent chills down Stacy's spine. The laptop made a quiet beep, and she quickly muted it, her heart stopping for a moment. But Robert was too busy crafting his perfect facade to notice. Karen appeared more unstable, her hands shaking as she prepared their false documentation in the kitchen. Stacy observed the interaction between the criminal couple while pretending to sort through her belongings. Karen's nervous glances and trembling hands didn't go unnoticed. There was weakness there, a crack in the united front. "Are you sure about this, Robert?" Karen whispered when she thought Stacy couldn't hear. "Maybe we should." "We've discussed this." Robert cut her off sharply. "Everything's arranged." Stacy seized the opportunity, playing on Karen's obvious doubt. "The other girls," she said quietly as she passed Karen in the hallway. "Did they really run away?" The color drained from Karen's face. Robert shot them both a warning look, but the seed of discord had been planted. The tension between the couple grew palpable as they continued their preparations. A suspicious-looking truck pulled into the garage, and Stacy's pulse quickened. Her time was running out. She checked her laptop one last time. The message had sent successfully. Now it was just a matter of time. Karen's deteriorating composure began to worry Robert. He kept glancing at his wife, his confident facade cracking slightly when she dropped a stack of papers, scattering them across the kitchen floor. "Pull yourself together," he hissed, helping her gather the documents. "We've done this before." Stacy continued packing, her movements methodical and careful, trying not to let her hope show on her face. The code she'd written was complex enough to bypass their monitoring systems, but simple enough to deliver its crucial message quickly. She could feel Robert's growing unease as Karen's behavior became more erratic. The perfect criminal partnership was showing signs of strain, and Stacy knew that desperation could make them even more dangerous. The sound of distant sirens pierced the afternoon air, causing Robert and Karen to exchange worried glances. While Stacy fought to suppress a flicker of relief that Robert's head snapped toward the window, his practiced composure slipping for the first time. "Those sirens are getting closer," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Karen's hands flew to her mouth. "Robert, what if—" "Shut up," he snapped, moving quickly to the front window. "Keep packing. Everything goes according to plan." Stacy maintained her steady packing rhythm, though her heart threatened to burst from her chest. She watched as Karen's fingers fumbled with more documents, dropping them again. The woman was unraveling quickly, and Robert's increasing agitation only made things worse. "I thought you said we had more time," Karen whispered, her voice breaking. "The arrangements for the new identities." "I said shut up." Robert's voice carried a dangerous edge. He turned to Stacy, eyes narrowing. "You get your things to the truck. Now." Stacy grabbed her backpack, deliberately taking her time. Each second might count now. She could hear multiple sirens, their wailing growing louder. Robert paced between windows, checking every angle of the house. A message notification flashed briefly on her laptop screen before she closed it. Jim had received her code. The subtle confirmation sent a wave of relief through her body, but she kept her face carefully neutral as she carried her belongings downstairs. The suspicious truck in the garage had its engine running. A man Stacy didn't recognize sat in the driver's seat, fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. More boxes were stacked in the back, and she could see duffel bags that likely contained their ill-gotten gains. "Robert," Karen called out, her voice trembling. "There's a police car at the end of the street." The distant sound of sirens grew steadily closer, cutting through the afternoon quiet of their suburban street. Robert and Karen looked at each other, the fear in their expressions undeniable. The first sound of sirens pierced the morning air, making Robert's head snap toward the window. Within seconds, police cars swarmed the street, their red and blue lights reflecting off the neighbors' windows. Stacy's heart raced as she watched Robert's face transform from confusion to rage. "You!" he snarled, lunging forward and grabbing her arm. "What did you do?" Before Stacy could react, Robert had pulled her against his chest, his arm wrapped tightly around her throat. Karen let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her mouth as she backed against the wall. "Robert, please," Karen whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't hurt her." "Shut up," Robert shouted, dragging Stacy toward the window. Outside, more police cars arrived, and officers took positions behind their vehicles, weapons drawn. Through the glass, Stacy spotted Jim's familiar figure emerging from an unmarked car. He wore a bulletproof vest over his usual button-down shirt, his face tight with concern as he spoke into a radio. "Nobody moves." Robert's voice boomed through the house. "I have the girl, and if anyone tries anything, she's dead." Stacy forced herself to remain calm, remembering Jim's self-defense lessons. "Keep breathing," he'd told her. "Fear is natural, but panic is your enemy." She measured her breaths, noting Robert's position, the tension in his arm, the way he shifted his weight. A negotiator's voice crackled through a megaphone. "Mr. Winters, this is the police. Let's talk about this." Karen had begun to cry, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "Robert, it's over," she sobbed. "We have to stop." "It's not over until I say it's over." Robert's grip tightened, making Stacy gasp. Jim's voice came next through the megaphone. "Robert, let's think about Stacy's safety. We can work this out." Stacy caught Jim's eye through the window, seeing him give an almost imperceptible nod. They had practiced the scenario in their defense classes, though neither had imagined it would become reality. Movement caught Stacy's attention as Karen slowly began inching toward the front door. "The other girls," Karen said, her voice shaking. "We should tell them about the other girls." "Don't you dare!" Robert's attention split between Karen and the windows, his grip on Stacy loosening slightly. "They're alive," Karen continued, now addressing the police outside. "All of them, in witness protection. We helped them escape their real criminal families. We thought we were helping." I said, "Shut up." Robert reached for something in his waistband, and Stacy saw the glint of a pistol. The police outside tensed visibly. Jim's voice came again, steady and calm. "Robert, putting down the weapon is your best option right now." Karen had reached the door, her hand hovering over the handle. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking at Stacy. "I'm so sorry for everything." Robert's rage exploded. "You treacherous dash," he started to turn toward Karen, the gun moving with him. Stacy felt the shift in his balance, remembering Jim's words during training. "The moment they shift, that's your window." She took a deep breath, watching Karen ease the door open. Police spotlights suddenly flooded the room through the windows, momentarily blinding Robert. His grip loosened for just a fraction of a second as he tried to shield his eyes. Karen bolted through the door, and Robert's attention divided one final time. Stacy could almost hear Jim's voice from their practice sessions. "When the moment comes, commit fully. Hesitation is your enemy." With a sudden movement, Stacy implemented the defensive maneuver Jim had taught her, catching Robert completely off guard. His grip broke as she twisted, using his own momentum against him. Years of martial arts training with Jim flooded back. The countless hours of practice, the repeated movements, all culminating in this crucial moment. She dropped her weight, sliding under his arm while grabbing his wrist, exactly as she'd done dozens of times in training. Robert stumbled forward, his balance completely disrupted. The gun clattered to the floor, spinning across the hardwood. Through the windows, Stacy could see the police teams tensing, ready to move. Now! Jim's voice boomed through the megaphone, and the front door burst open. Officers poured in, their movements precise and coordinated. Robert tried to lunge for the fallen weapon, but two officers tackled him before he could reach it. Don't move. Hands behind your back. Stacy scrambled away as Robert was pinned to the floor, his face pressed against the hardwood as officers secured his wrists with handcuffs. Outside, she could see Karen already in custody, being led to a police car. Jim rushed in, immediately pulling Stacy behind a protective line of officers. "Are you okay?" he asked, checking her for injuries. Before she could answer, a detective emerged from Robert's home office, holding a stack of folders. "Sir, you need to see this. We've found documentation of everything. The bank robberies, the previous adoptions, all of it." More officers continued to search the house, calling out as they discovered evidence. Another weapons cache in the garage, financial records in the basement. "Sir, we've got photos of previous bank locations." Through it all, Robert remained silent, his face a mask of cold fury as officers let him out. Karen, however, had begun talking to the detectives by their car, her shoulders shaking with sobs as she detailed their operation. Stacy watched from Jim's protective embrace as evidence bags were carried out one by one. Years of criminal activity, all hidden behind the facade of a perfect adoptive family. She could see neighbors gathering at the edges of the police barrier, their faces shocked as they witnessed the unraveling of what they thought was an ideal family. A detective approached with a notebook. "Miss Thompson, we'll need your statement when you're ready. The evidence you managed to document is going to be crucial to this case." Robert twisted in his captor's grip as they led him to a separate police car, his eyes locking with Stacy's. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. Jim stepped between them, shielding Stacy from Robert's glare. "She did exactly what she needed to do," he said firmly, his hand steady on Stacy's shoulder. Watching Robert being placed in the police car, Stacy felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, fear, sadness, and something else she couldn't quite name. As she turned to face Jim, he looked at her with an expression that would change her life forever. With a sudden movement, Stacy had implemented the defensive maneuver Jim had taught her, catching Robert completely off guard. Stacy's muscles tensed as she recalled Jim's self-defense lessons. In one fluid motion, she twisted her body, using Robert's own weight against him. The move caught him completely off guard. His grip loosened, and the gun wavered in his trembling hand. Time seemed to slow as Stacy executed the maneuver perfectly, ducking under his arm and driving her elbow into his solar plexus. Robert's grunt of pain filled the air as he stumbled backward, the weapon clattering to the floor. In an instant, the front door burst open and a flood of police officers poured into the house. "Down! Get down!" Their shouts echoed through the rooms as they converged on Robert, who was still gasping for air. Karen, standing in the corner with tears streaming down her face, raised her hands immediately. "I surrender," she whispered, sinking to her knees. The fight had left her completely. Stacy felt Jim's strong hands pulling her to safety. Her heart pounded as she watched the officers handcuff Robert, who was still struggling despite being pinned to the ground. Through the chaos, she could hear him shouting denials and threats. "The office," Stacy managed to say to Jim, her voice shaking but determined. "There's a false bottom in the desk drawer. Everything's there." The investigators moved quickly, following her directions. Within minutes, they had discovered a treasure trove of incriminating documents, detailed plans of bank heists, false identities, and most disturbing of all, files on previous foster children who had lived with the Winters. Karen's composure crumbled completely during her initial police interview. We needed the perfect cover, she sobbed, avoiding Stacy's gaze. Who would suspect a couple dedicated to taking in troubled teens? Robert said it was foolproof. As the officers cataloged evidence, Stacy identified key items she had discovered during her investigation. The mask and gloves from the garage, the hidden money in the attic, her carefully documented timeline of Robert's mysterious absences matching the bank robberies. Robert maintained his defiant stance even in handcuffs. "You ungrateful little spy," he spat at Stacy as officers led him toward the door. "We gave you everything." Jim stepped between them protectively. "The only thing you gave her was the strength to bring you down," he replied firmly, his hand steady on Stacy's shoulder. The investigation team worked methodically through the house, uncovering more evidence with each passing minute. Bank blueprints were found hidden behind paintings. A safe in the basement yielded stacks of marked bills. The facade of the perfect Foster family crumbled completely under the weight of undeniable proof. Stacy watched as forensics teams photographed and bagged evidence, her mind racing through the events that had led to this moment. Every suspicious night, every hush phone call, every threatening glance, it had all built to this. "You did good, kid," one of the detectives told her, clearly impressed by her methodical documentation. "Your evidence made this case airtight." Karen's full confession began to paint a picture of their operation spanning years. Other foster children who had grown suspicious had been quietly relocated to different states, their records altered to show voluntary departures. The scheme had been more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. As the last police car pulled away with Robert, Stacy finally felt the adrenaline leaving her system. Her legs wobbled slightly, and Jim guided her to sit on the front steps of the house. Emergency lights still flashed across the neighborhood, drawing curious onlookers. "I can't believe it's really over," she whispered, watching as crime scene tape was strung around the property that had briefly been her home. Jim sat beside her, his expression thoughtful as he watched the organized chaos of the crime scene processing. After a moment of silence, he turned to her with an unexpected suggestion that would change her life forever. "Stacy," Jim began, his voice gentle but firm, "Sarah and I have been talking. We'd like you to come stay with us. Not as a temporary placement, but as family." The words hung in the air as Stacy processed their meaning. Through the window of a police car, she caught a final glimpse of Robert being driven away, his face twisted in anger. The sight of him disappearing into the night somehow made Jim's offer feel even more significant. The last of the evidence was being loaded into forensics vans. Photographs of the crime scene continued as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across what had almost become another tragic story in the foster care system. Instead, it had become a moment of triumph, though Stacy felt more exhausted than victorious. "You don't have to answer right now," Jim added, noticing her overwhelmed expression. "But know that our door is always open." A detective approached them, notepad in hand. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow for a formal statement," she explained. "What you've uncovered here, it's going to help us solve several cold cases. Those other girls who disappeared, we're already working on locating them." Stacy nodded, her mind still reeling from everything that had transpired. The weight of the past few weeks, the fear, the investigation, the constant vigilance, began to lift from her shoulders. Yet questions remained about the other foster children who had faced similar situations. How many others were out there, trapped in homes that looked perfect on the surface? As the last police vehicle prepared to leave, an officer emerged from the house with Stacy's backpack and laptop, the tools that had helped her expose the truth. The same devices Robert and Karen had tried to use to control her had ultimately led to their downfall. The night air grew cooler, and Jim draped his jacket over Stacy's shoulders. In that simple gesture, she felt more parental care than she had experienced in all her time with the Winters. The irony wasn't lost on her. The family that had seemed perfect had been a nightmare, while real love had been quietly supporting her all along. While Jim watched the last of the crime scene units finish their work, Stacy pulled out her phone and looked at Sarah's number. The woman who might become her real mother waited just a phone call away. As police sirens faded into the distance, Robert was led away to begin facing justice. Jim made an unexpected proposal that would reshape Stacy's future. Stacy sat in Jim's office, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. The events of the past few days had left her exhausted, but there was something different about Jim's demeanor today. He leaned forward, his usually professional expression softening into something more personal. "Stacy, my wife Sarah and I have been talking," Jim began, his voice gentle. "We've been fostering children for years, and we've always believed in providing a permanent home when it feels right. We'd like to offer you that home, if you're interested." The words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. After years of temporary homes and false starts, after the nightmare with the Winters, the offer seemed almost too good to be true. "You mean adoption?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Jim nodded, smiling. "We have 2 other children, both adopted. Emma is 14 and Marcus is 12. They already know about you, and they're excited about the possibility of having a big sister." That weekend, Jim drove Stacy to his house, a modest 2-story home with a well-tended garden and a basketball hoop in the driveway. Sarah was waiting at the door, her warm smile immediately putting Stacy at ease. She was nothing like Karen's practiced perfectionism. Sarah's hair was slightly messy, and she wore comfortable jeans and a paint-stained sweater. "Welcome, Stacy," Sarah said, pulling her into a natural hug that didn't feel forced or awkward. "We're having lasagna for dinner. Jim mentioned it's your favorite." Inside, Emma and Marcus bounded down the stairs, their curiosity evident but not overwhelming. Emma, with her curly red hair and freckles, immediately launched into a conversation about their shared taste in music, while Marcus shyly showed Stacy his collection of comic books. The house was lived in, with family photos covering the walls and books scattered on coffee tables. It wasn't perfect. There were dishes in the sink and a basket of unfolded laundry in the living room. But it felt real. "Would you like to see your room?" Sarah asked. "It's nothing fancy yet, but we can decorate it together if you decide to stay." The room was simple but comfortable, with pale blue walls and a window seat overlooking the backyard. Unlike the pristine guest room at the Winters, this one felt like it could become truly hers. Over dinner, Stacy found herself opening up about her experiences. She told them about her fears, her doubts, and her dreams. The family listened without judgment, offering support and understanding. The following week brought the first court appearance. Stacy's hands trembled as she entered the courthouse, but Jim and Sarah flanked her protectively. During her testimony about the Winters, she caught sight of Karen in her prison jumpsuit. The woman looked smaller somehow, defeated, and when their eyes met, Karen mouthed what looked like "I'm sorry." Back at Jim's house, which was slowly becoming her house, Emma helped Stacy arrange her few belongings in her new room. They hung fairy lights around the window and put up posters of their favorite bands. Marcus contributed a spare bookshelf from the basement. "You know," Emma said as they worked, "I was scared too when I first came here. But Mom and Dad, they're the real deal. They don't give up on us." That night, during dinner, Stacy looked around the table. Marcus was trying to convince his dad to let him have a pet snake, while Sarah and Emma debated the merits of different pizza toppings. The scene was chaotic, noisy, and perfectly imperfect. For the first time in years, Stacy felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. As she helped Sarah with the dishes afterward, she found herself thinking about all the other kids still in the system, all the ones who needed someone to watch out for them. During a conversation with other teens at a support group meeting, Stacy listened to their stories, their fears about adoption, their experiences with failed placements. A thought began to form in her mind, a way to help others avoid what she went through with the Winters. Their voices echoed her own past experiences, and as each teen shared their story, Stacy found herself taking mental notes. One girl described how her foster parents seemed too perfect, reminding her uncomfortably of the Winters. Another spoke about being isolated from friends and social workers, his voice trembling as he recounted the experience. Later that evening, as Sarah drove her home from the support group, Stacy couldn't stop thinking about the patterns she'd noticed. The warning signs had been there with the Winters. If only she'd known what to look for sooner. "You're quiet tonight," Sarah observed, glancing at her with gentle concern. "Just thinking," Stacy replied, watching the streetlights blur past. "All those kids today, they've been through so much. Some of them are still going through it." At home, over a cup of hot chocolate, Stacy sat with Jim and Sarah at the kitchen table. Emma and Marcus had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the dishwasher. "We understand if you need more time," Jim said softly. "The adoption process can move at whatever pace feels right for you." Stacy wrapped her hands around the warm mug, feeling the security of the moment. "I don't need more time," she said, surprising herself at the certainty in her voice. "I know this is where I belong." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, and she reached across the table to squeeze Stacy's hand. The simple gesture carried more genuine maternal love than any of Karen's elaborate displays ever had. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and court appearances. Stacy's final meeting with her court-appointed advocate was a formality. The woman had nothing but praise for the placement with Jim's family. Even the judge smiled when he reviewed the case, noting the remarkable transformation he'd seen in Stacy since the Winters' arrest. On a sunny Saturday morning, Stacy stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the new dress Sarah had helped her pick out. Today was the official adoption ceremony. Emma had helped her braid her hair, and Marcus had made her a card with a surprisingly good drawing of their family, including her. As they entered the courthouse, this time without fear, Stacy was surrounded by her new family. Other teens from her support group had come to witness the ceremony, their presence a reminder of the community she'd found. The judge's words became official declarations, and suddenly it was real. She had a family, a real one, with a mom who baked cookies that sometimes burned, a dad who told terrible jokes, a sister who borrowed her clothes without asking, and a brother who left Lego pieces all over the house. That night, during another wonderfully chaotic family dinner, Stacy watched as Marcus attempted to explain the plot of his latest favorite comic book, while Emma rolled her eyes and Sarah tried to convince everyone to eat their vegetables. Jim caught her eye across the table and winked, as if sharing a private joke about their lovely, messy family. During a conversation with other teens at the local youth center, Stacy shared her story, watching their faces as they recognized elements of their own experiences. An idea began to take shape, a way to help others navigate the complex world of foster care and adoption, to create a safety net that she wished she'd had. Stacy stood before the group of social workers, her hands slightly trembling as she gripped her presentation notes. Jim sat in the front row, offering an encouraging smile. Taking a deep breath, she began sharing her vision for a program that would help foster children identify potential dangerous situations in adoptive homes. "We need more than just background checks," she explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We need to teach these kids what to look for, what subtle signs might indicate trouble, and most importantly, how to safely report their concerns." The room fell silent as Stacy shared her personal story, using it as a foundation for her proposed warning system. She outlined a comprehensive approach that included regular check-ins, a buddy system, and encrypted communication channels for emergencies. The social workers leaned forward, taking notes and nodding in agreement. 2 weeks later, Stacy found herself leading her first support group. 10 teenagers sat in a circle, their expressions ranging from skeptical to hopeful. "I know what it's like to feel trapped," she began, "to worry that speaking up might mean losing your chance at a family. But your safety matters more than anything else." As the teens shared their stories, Stacy noticed patterns emerging, similar to what she had experienced with the Winters. She helped them develop strategies for documenting suspicious behavior and identifying safe adults they could trust. The group created a code system for text messages, allowing them to signal distress without alerting their foster parents. Jim's family threw themselves wholeheartedly into supporting the project. His wife, Sarah, helped design informational materials, while their children assisted with social media outreach. The dining room table became command central, covered with laptops and papers, as they built their network of support. The first success story came sooner than expected. A 14-year-old girl named Maya used one of Stacy's warning signs to identify potential trafficking behavior in her new home. Thanks to the early intervention system Stacy had put in place, Maya was removed before any harm could come to her. Local authorities took notice. The police department requested Stacy's input on improving their response to foster care emergencies. Social services in neighboring counties began implementing her warning system. A small grant allowed them to expand the program's reach, providing secure phones to high-risk teens. During a particularly emotional session, Stacy worked with a girl whose situation mirrored her own experience with the Winters. Together, they uncovered evidence of illegal activities in the girl's foster home. The successful intervention validated everything Stacy had been working toward. Local news picked up the story. Stacy found herself being interviewed, carefully sharing her message while protecting the privacy of the teens in her program. The exposure brought more resources and volunteers, allowing them to establish support groups in 3 additional cities. The network grew stronger with each passing week. Foster teens began teaching each other, passing along Stacy's wisdom and adding their own insights. They created a secure online forum where they could share experiences and offer support, always under the watchful eye of trained moderators. One afternoon, while watching a new group of teens practice safety protocols, Stacy felt tears welling up in her eyes. Jim appeared beside her, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You've created something amazing here," he said softly. "We all did," Stacy replied, watching as a shy girl demonstrated the emergency alert system to her peers. "Every kid who shares their story makes our network stronger." The celebration of their 100th successful intervention brought together teens, social workers, and supporters from across the state. Stacy stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of young people who now had tools to protect themselves. As she shared stories of triumph and resilience, she could see hope replacing fear in their eyes. Later that evening, as Stacy was packing up materials from the celebration, her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from the prison where Karen was being held, requesting a meeting. Stacy stared at the phone, her hand trembling slightly. The message brought a flood of memories, but they no longer held the same power over her. She had transformed her trauma into a force for positive change. The next morning, she received another success story. A 16-year-old boy had used their anonymous reporting system to alert authorities about financial irregularities in his foster home. The investigation revealed a money laundering operation similar to the Winters scheme. The boy was safely relocated, and 2 more children were prevented from being placed in that home. During their weekly strategy meeting, Stacy's team expanded the training program to include financial red flags. They developed a simple checklist that teens could use to identify suspicious patterns without putting themselves at risk. The local FBI office offered to provide additional training on recognizing signs of criminal enterprises. As word spread about the program's effectiveness, calls came in from advocacy groups across the country. Stacy found herself conducting virtual training sessions, teaching other communities how to implement her protection protocols. Each success story strengthened her resolve to reach more vulnerable youth. The project's database grew, documenting patterns and helping to identify potential threats before children were placed in dangerous situations. Social services began using their screening tools as part of their standard evaluation process. The system that Stacy had dreamed up in her darkest moments was now helping to prevent others from experiencing similar trauma. One evening, while reviewing applications for their peer mentor program, Stacy received an emergency alert through their system. A young girl had recognized the warning signs they'd taught her and reached out for help. Within hours, their response team had coordinated with local authorities to ensure her safety. These were the moments that made all the late nights and emotional challenges worthwhile. Your experience hasn't just helped one person, Jim told her during their weekly check-in. You've created a ripple effect that's changing the entire foster care system. Stacy nodded, thinking about how far they'd come from those first tentative meetings. The frightened girl who had once hidden evidence in her school notebook was now leading a movement to protect others. She had found her purpose in the very system that had once failed her. An unexpected phone call from the prison interrupted her thoughts. Karen wanted to talk. Stacy sat in Jim's car, her hands fidgeting with the visitor's pass as they approached the state prison. The massive concrete walls loomed ahead, a stark reminder of the life she had narrowly escaped. Jim glanced at her with concern. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "I do," Stacy replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I need to close this chapter." The prison processing took forever. Fingerprints, metal detectors, multiple checkpoints. Each buzz of an electronic door made Stacy's heart jump. Finally, she was led to a sterile visiting room. Karen sat at one of the tables, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made her look older and smaller than Stacy remembered. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Karen's hands trembled as she reached across the table, then thought better of it and withdrew them to her lap. "Thank you for coming," Karen said, her voice cracking. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Stacy admitted. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Karen broke first. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We used you. I used you. There's no excuse for what we did, to you or the others." "Where are they?" Stacy asked a question that had haunted her for months. "The other girls?" Karen's eyes filled with tears. "They're safe. When they discovered what Robert was doing, he sent them away, paid them to disappear. I have their contact information. I've already given it to the authorities." Stacy absorbed this information, relief washing over her. She had imagined much worse fates for her predecessors. Robert was... Karen paused, searching for words. He wasn't always like this. The first robbery was supposed to be just once, to save our house. But then it became an addiction. The girls were his idea, a perfect cover story. I was too weak to stop him. But you watched it happen. Multiple times. Karen nodded, shame evident in every line of her face. "I'll never forgive myself. But seeing you, your strength, your determination, it woke something in me. You saved me too, in a way." Leaving the prison, Stacy felt lighter. The conversation hadn't erased the past, but it had helped her understand it. Jim was waiting, ready to drive her home, her real home now. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Stacy's program for protecting foster children had gained national attention. She graduated high school with honors, her new family cheering loudly from the audience. The adoption ceremony was small but perfect, officially making her a member of Jim's family. One sunny afternoon, Stacy visited her old orphanage. The building hadn't changed, but she had. Children played in the yard while she met with the staff, sharing her experiences and the warning signs she'd learned to recognize. "Your program has already prevented 3 potentially dangerous placements," the director told her proudly. "You're making a real difference." A support group meeting brought together several survivors of similar situations. Tears and hugs were shared as stories poured out, each person finding strength in the knowledge they weren't alone. At home, Stacy's room was covered in college acceptance letters and program expansion plans. Her adoptive mother helped her sort through them, while her new siblings added their opinions about which school she should choose. "Whatever you decide," Jim said, "we're behind you." The next day, Stacy received a call about a new case, a 14-year-old girl showing signs of distress in her foster home. Without hesitation, Stacy gathered her materials and headed to the agency. Through the office window, She watched a scared teenager being interviewed by social workers. The girl's defensive posture and nervous glances were all too familiar. Stacy knew her work protecting and guiding others was just beginning, and she was ready for it. Stacy watched as a new teenage girl entered the system, knowing that her work of protection and guidance was only beginning. The young girl reminded Stacy of herself, shoulders hunched, eyes darting around the room, looking for escape routes. Her name was Emily, according to the file, and she had already flagged several warning signs about her current foster family. Sometimes the hardest part is admitting something's wrong, Stacy said softly as she entered the room. Emily's head snapped up, wariness evident in her expression. I know, because I've been exactly where you are. Over the next hour, Stacy shared her story, watching understanding dawn in Emily's eyes. The girl's defenses slowly lowered as she recognized the parallels in their experiences. How did you know they weren't just being strict? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a difference between structure and control, Stacy explained, pulling out her checklist, the same one that was now being implemented in foster care programs across 3 states. Real families want you to grow. Dangerous ones want to cage you. By the end of their session, Emily had revealed enough red flags to warrant immediate intervention. Stacy stayed with her through the removal process, holding her hand as she packed her few belongings. Later that evening, back at home with Jim's family, Stacy sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset. Her younger adoptive sister brought her a mug of hot chocolate and curled up beside her. Did you help another kid today? She asked, genuine interest in her voice. Yeah, Stacy smiled. And tomorrow there'll be another one. But now they don't have to face it alone. Her phone buzzed with a message from the support group, another success story. A teenager had recognized the warning signs they discussed and reached out for help before things escalated. Looking through her college acceptance letters one more time, Stacy had finally made her decision. She would attend the local state university, majoring in social work while continuing to develop her protection program. The system was far from perfect, but it was changing one story at a time. Stacy's own journey from victim to advocate had created ripples that were still spreading, touching lives she might never even know about. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Stacy felt at peace. She had found her purpose, her family, and her strength. The scared girl who had once discovered a suspicious briefcase in an attic had transformed into someone who could protect others from similar dangers. The porch light came on, and Jim called everyone in for dinner. Stacy smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, and new opportunities to make a difference. She was ready for all of it. Time for our famous Friday family tacos, her adoptive mother announced as Stacy entered the warm kitchen, filled with the sounds and smells of home, her real home. This was her life now, a perfect blend of healing from the past and building for the future. And somewhere out there, other teenagers would sleep safer tonight because she had refused to stay silent. Stacy watched as a new teenage girl entered the system, knowing that her work of protection and guidance was only beginning.